Night enveloped the Italian front like a thick, icy blanket. In the German trenches, the soldiers remained silent, shivering. It wasn't just the cold. Their nerves overwhelmed them, and fear dominated their bodies. Rumors had spread for weeks. A deadly shadow lurked in the darkness. No one saw them coming. No one heard their footsteps. Only corpses appeared, their throats slashed, and a note pinned to their chests. The worst is yet to come. From high on the mountain, spectral figures stalked the enemy. With their faces painted black and knives clutched in their hands, they created hell for the Nazis. In this new military history video, we'll learn all about the 1st Special Service Force, the so-called Devil's Brigade. Join us to discover how this Allied unit left its mark during World War II. In late 1941 and early 1942, the war was at its critical point. Europe was under Nazi control, and Germany was firmly entrenched in France, the Balkans, and North Africa. Furthermore, the Soviet Union was struggling to hold out on the Eastern Front, where Adolf Hitler had launched his invasion known as Operation Barbarossa. Meanwhile, a new player was taking its first steps in the battle, the United States, which entered the conflict after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Faced with these challenges, the Allies began exploring unconventional methods of warfare to weaken the Axis. This is how the idea of Geoffrey Pike, a British strategist, emerged. He presented his nation's high command with a proposal to form a specialized unit. It would be trained in sabotage and snow guerrilla operations, primarily for attacks in Norway and other Arctic regions. It would be equipped with ski equipment, light weapons, and extremely mobile training to harass the Nazis. According to Pike, their presence would force Hitler to send reinforcements to that area, weakening his presence in other key European locations. The plan seemed promising, so the British sent it to Washington for analysis. Colonel Robert Frederick was responsible for dampening the enthusiasm. He argued that exhaustive training of a group of soldiers to be deployed on Norwegian soil would not provide the expected advantage. However, he admitted that the idea wasn't entirely wrong. He determined that a versatile unit like the one Pike proposed would be extremely useful. Thus, he began to refine the original concept and created the 1st Special Service Force. It would emphasize the ability to operate in mountains, forests, and hostile environments, with special emphasis on hand-to-hand combat and sabotage. A recruitment model for soldiers from the United States and Canada was quickly devised. Volunteers with experience in hunting, mountaineering, skiing, and wilderness life were sought. Lumberjacks, miners, farmers, and forest rangers were favored for the job, men with physical and mental resilience. By July 1942, a large group arrived at Fort Harrison, Montana, where their exhaustive training would begin. This region of North America was ideal for the rigorous training the unit would undergo. Its cold climate, mountainous terrain, and isolation allowed for uninterrupted work and the ability to accustom themselves to hostile conditions. The goal was to transform these men into highly specialized war machines. Therefore, an extreme 6-month program was designed. Only the best could pass it, and the initial number of recruits dwindled after several withdrawals and injuries. The training consisted of several components. First, there was physical endurance, which had to be superior to that of conventional troops. To improve this aspect, marches of up to 80 kilometers were undertaken with 30-kilogram backpacks. The hikes were often at night and without rest, over steep terrain, and included combat simulations. In between, survival training was also provided: hunting, shelter construction, and water purification. At the same time, they sometimes had to sleep in the snow with minimal equipment to withstand the cold. To complete this stage, each soldier had to be able to march 8 kilometers in less than 50 minutes in full gear and run 3 kilometers in less than 15 minutes. The instructors imposed physical punishment for any mistakes, or prohibited them from sleeping until they achieved their objectives. This forged extreme discipline. While the recruits improved their physical endurance, they also perfected other aspects. They underwent extremely detailed weapons training. They used different types of rifles and marksmanship exercises. They had to shoot at moving targets in different weather conditions with poor visibility. They had to hit 90% of their shots at moving targets to be considered fit. However, This requirement wasn't the only one for battle. The unit distinguished itself by its hand-to-hand combat. The objective was to be stealthy, operate at night, and attack without the enemy noticing their presence. It was for this reason that they trained in karate and jiu-jitsu techniques, among others. They practiced strangulations, bayonet attacks, and close-quarters combat. But primarily, they trained in the use of knives, as one was designed specifically for the unit, the V-42 Stiletto, a sharp and lethal weapon that would become their main ally. Finally, they also learned about night infiltrations, rapid attacks, and the use of explosives against key enemy infrastructure. But the final distinguishing feature of the 1st Special Service Force was their ability to reach places impossible for other soldiers. They trained in the use of skis and snowshoes for movement in cold climates. They also trained in rock climbing without safety equipment. All of this, taking into account the possibility of having to set up ambushes or quickly camouflage themselves in the face of a German presence. And finally, if none of this was enough, they would be able to arrive by air and jump from an airplane thanks to parachute jump training. Each of the unit's lessons shaped them into unique soldiers, capable of triumphing where no other troops could. Within this framework, they were chosen to deploy in some of the toughest battles of World War II, and their first mission took them to Italy. The 1st Special Service Force arrived on European soil in November 1943, at a critical moment in the war. The Allies were trying to advance toward Rome, but encountered German resistance at the Gustav Line, a series of impregnable fortifications blocking their way. There, the American and Canadian commandos that made up the unit would take action. Their most memorable battle is that of Monte la Defensa, which took place in early December. There was a natural fortress with almost vertical slopes of rock and snow. The Nazis had an elevated position that provided them with a perfect firing range for any approaching attackers. However, despite the multiple failures of conventional British and American troops, there was hope. Hitler's men had no idea that someone would climb the mountain at night and attack them from the rear. Instead of attacking head-on, the commandos scaled the steepest face of the mountain in the dead of night, carrying equipment and weapons in absolute silence. Using stealth, they reached the summit and waited patiently until launching a ferocious surprise offensive before dawn. The Germans, completely unprepared, became prey to these savage demons, who moved like ghosts in the darkness, their faces painted black and almost invisible. They used their full potential: precise shooting, hand-to-hand combat, knives and bayonets. The result was total chaos behind enemy lines. In just 2 hours, the commandos were practically ready to take the summit, eliminating the Nazi resistance. The mountain was secured, and the surviving Germans were forced to retreat. However, the soldiers of the Third Reich also fought ferociously. The unit paid a heavy price, with more than 70 dead and nearly 300 wounded. Still, it achieved a key victory that allowed the Allied advance toward Rome to continue. The commandos had acted like savage demons in the night, which had 2 consequences. The first was their new name, the Devil's Brigade. The second was something much more difficult to achieve. They had become the terror of the Nazis. Their ability to infiltrate enemy lines undetected and attack without warning in the dark sowed fear among their enemies. The Germans didn't know when they would be attacked or from where. This created constant fear and sleepless nights in the trenches. Added to this was the brutality of this highly trained brigade. Hitler's warriors often encountered corpses with their throats cut, covered in blood, a cut throat or a dagger in the middle of the chest. But that wasn't all. The unit, aware of the terror it generated in the Nazis, strengthened its position with psychological messages designed to affect the enemy's morale. After each raid, they posted signs with German phrases intended to sow panic. They even took bodies to make the soldiers believe they were actually demons devouring their comrades.
We have been ordered to use these. When you kill a German, place it on his helmet, uniform, somewhere where it is sure to be found.
What the hell does it mean?
The worst is yet to cover. Colonel, General Frederick, says it is intended to demoralize. There's our symbol, the Black Devils.
Another battle in which the Devil's Brigade instilled fear in its rivals was at Anzio, between February and May 1944. The unit was deployed on the beach, where the Allies were attempting to break through the German defenses and continue their advance on the Italian capital. They carried out night patrols and surprise attacks. They also infiltrated enemy lines in the darkness, razing entire trenches. They managed to eliminate more than 500 Nazis in a single attack, suffering almost no casualties. With great mobility and stealth, they even confused the Third Reich troops, who believed they were facing more soldiers than they actually were. This forced the Nazis to maintain reserves in the area for fear of a major offensive, allowing the Allies to plan a successful strategy on the road to Rome. Finally, the Devil's Brigade was sent to France in 1944, where it was part of Operation Dragoon. The objective was to seize ports and destroy the German resistance that remained in the area after the Normandy landings. They were tasked with capturing the Nazi-fortified Hyer Islands. In a swift and lethal operation, they eliminated more than 100 opposing troops in close combat and secured that territory. They then advanced inland, pursuing and annihilating retreating Third Reich forces. After their successful engagement in France, the unit came to an end. It was disbanded on December 5, 1944, due to personnel losses after nearly a year of constant combat. Because their training was too specialized, there was a lack of replacements. Many of its remaining members transferred to elite units, such as the U.S. Army Rangers and the Canadian paratroopers. In this way, the Great Terror of the Nazis was dismissed, but with the knowledge that it had made an important contribution to the conflict. The Devil's Brigade was one of the most feared and respected combat units of World War II. Their methods made them a devastating force, and thanks to them, they led to victory over the Germans and ended the war. And so we come to the end. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to our next installment to learn more about military history